Well, thank you for coming, and I'm glad the snow is coming in later, so it didn't discourage people from coming in. So some of you know my background already, and some people don't, but I'll briefly go through the fact that at some point I had never intended to do anything like this. I was a high school math teacher. And I had art in high school and college, but when I was teaching, I was coaching, I was marathon training. I didn't have time to do art. And in 1985, I moved out to Colorado, and I was teaching at Air Academy High School, the Air Force Academy. And I was only there for 2 years before I moved to Liberty. Liberty High School was built in District 20 in 1987, and so then I moved there. But for 2 years I was there at Air Academy High School, and in '86, the Challenger shuttle disaster occurred. And you can imagine how that might impact Air Force families and stuff, because they all are pretty well connected, and it was real tragic. So over that weekend, I'm trying to decide, okay, how do I get the kids refocused back in the classroom again? That last day, the day it happened, I mean, every classroom was set up with TV sets, and we were watching and stuff, and no teaching took place that day for sure. So I started thinking, and I had all kinds of plastic containers and stuff in my garbage can I was ready to throw out, and I thought, we had just gotten into a unit on scaling and proportions. And so I came up with the idea that maybe we could do a project where we could build something, do something hands-on. And the idea came up to build the space shuttle, rebuild the space shuttle. So then I started doing some research, and I found out that you could actually find out the dimensions for the booster rockets, the space shuttle itself, that kind of stuff. So over the weekend, with the trash I just had laying around the house, I built a space shuttle. And I made these little decals, and I put it on and everything. And then I had an idea of how I could have the kids do some math and do research so it would be related to what we were learning in ratios and proportions. And also the idea that if you have things in the correct ratios, like the booster rockets compared to the space shuttle, it's going to look correct, it's going to look to scale. If it's not proportional, it's going to look strange. So Monday morning I brought it in, I had it sitting on the desk, and it was a geometry class. And kids were coming in and they were looking at it, I didn't say anything, and class started, and one of the first things I said was, we have a project coming up, if you want to do it. You can pick a partner to do it with in class, and we're going to rebuild the space shuttle. And eyes got big, and people were surprised, and then one of the kids in the back of the class wasn't a student that was particularly interested in math. He said, "We get to build something in here?" And I said, yeah. And I gave him the ground rules. I said, don't go buying any expensive materials, just use things that you would normally throw out in your house, just repurpose materials. And I told him the math that was involved, and I brought in the model to show him what kind of things I was looking for, and to maybe inspire them a little bit to show them it actually could be done with trash. So then I sent them off on the project. I have a picture of it. I don't know how I kept it over the years, but you know it's old, it's on a Polaroid. So I got a picture of what it looked like. And then in some project after that, well, let me backtrack a little bit. That project turned out so well. I had little ones come in, I had big ones, I had the only room in the building that had two walls, two windows that faced Pikes Peak, and they had these nice big shelves on them. And I had the whole set of walls lined with all these space shuttles and stuff. And one day the principal comes in and he's looking at that, and he didn't say anything. He came in to ask me about something, and then later when I met with him, he asked me about a project, and I told him, and he said, what a wonderful idea. And he was just amazed at what the kids turned out. So after that, every year I would have a project where they would build something, and kind of the same guidelines. One year it might be build a orbiting satellite or a Mars rover or something like that. And a lot of it had to do with science, math combinations and stuff. So I'm going to pass this around so you can look at it. So along with that, I have two other pieces that I did. They're Star Trek related. One of them is the Starship Enterprise, the original one. And one of them is from one of the episodes. The alien machine was called, let's see, I can't even think what the name was. But it was, Nomad it was called. And some of you, if you watch Star Trek, you might recognize it. But I'll pass it around and you can take a look at it. Of course, since then, my materials, my pieces have become a little more refined and more details and stuff. But I started off using plastic. And that's one of the things that when I talk about how you can get started doing something like this. In fact, shortly after I moved here, I had a robot building class here at the library. And we brought in all kinds of plastic containers and stuff. And we set up a couple of tables filled with hot glue guns. And we had 22 kids show up. And for 3 hours, we built robots. And some of the stuff that they walked away with was amazing. We had a bunch of parents that came in helping and stuff. And I mentioned that a good way to start off is to use plastics. If you make a mistake, something you were going to throw away anyway. And then plastic, I don't use glue when I make anything, nor do I weld either, but it's a good way to get started just to see what you can do. And then if you do use hot glue, like once in a while I'll use a spot of it to hold two pieces together so that when I attach them with brackets or whatever, they're in the right spot that I want them to be. But it's not a structural thing. It doesn't hold things together. Because I found after a while, glue doesn't always hold anymore. And then hot glue, especially real warm conditions or real cold conditions, things will separate. But this is a piece that was done with things I just normally would throw away. I thought, well, I would go back and do something just with plastic containers. So the only thing I wouldn't throw away, I did have a solar light that I put inside this cup here, so that at night, this thing actually glows. It lights up. So it makes a nice night light. But you can almost recognize some of the pieces. And that's the challenge sometimes, to figure out what some of these pieces were before I got a hold of them. These were frozen juice containers. Langier, they used to sell them at Safeway, but they were like frozen grape juice and stuff. These are like wall anchor screws. You can see the big shaver handles. This is a burned out light from an overhead projector. Can't believe they saved a burned out light from an overhead projector. I don't throw anything away. These black pieces here are ink cartridges from my HP printer. They make good robot boots too. And then this is some plastic piping, and I had a fan that died. The blade I have on the end of my propane tank, I turned it into the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. So that's blowing in the wind probably right now. But this was the stand for the fan, and so use it for this, and then I have a wing nut so you can tighten it. You can adjust it to like it's coming in for a landing or if it's taking off. And then this is from one of those caps from, it's called the Magic Bullet Juicer or something. Sometimes I pick up things, I don't know what they are, but I thought, well, something I can use. And then like a couple of these are old LED caps. They're kind of vintage. And then these little caps here, I have glow-in-the-dark hot glue I filled them with, so at night these glow in the dark. I love using that stuff, glow-in-the-dark hot glue. A lot of people don't know that there is such a thing. And then they make glow-in-the-dark paint too, you can put on things. When you're working with plastics, I learned a couple of things over the years. If you have plastic that's kind of shiny, I take a real fine-grained sandpaper and I sand over it to give it some roughness. And then there's some pretty good plastic glues out there that will hold quite well. Even something like, I think it's called JB Weld or something. I mean, it'll weld plastic and glass and metal. So if you roughen it up good, and then you can glue them together, and then I put tape on to hold it in position sometimes. Krylon makes a really good, in fact, Rust-Oleum now and a couple other companies make a really good paint for plastics, metallic paints. So you can get some pretty cool bright colors if you're going to be painting plastic. But again, even with painting, if you rough up the surface lightly, the paint will adhere to it. And then they even have primers for plastic. So I would put that on first and then spray over the top of that, and that works pretty good. If you have a dark color piece of plastic, like if I was going to paint this, I would sand it, of course, and then sometimes it works better if you spray a coat of white on first and then spray your color onto that. The color stands out more than if you try to put a color on to black. You just get a much better result. Yes?
Could you put it on the shelf behind you so we can see it? It's higher up.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you
That
go.
helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, so then you can review it.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to start off, is to find things that you normally would throw away and experiment with that and see how it works. As far as the stuff I do now, I try to use metal whenever possible. Metal's more durable, it lasts a lot longer, it gives it better quality. I don't know how many times I've dropped a piece when I'm unloading, and I've never broken anything yet.
Wow.
So, and if I have, it's just, okay, well, I'll just unscrew that arm and I'll put something else on. And that's one of the reasons I don't weld either or glue is I find that I have a lot more freedom when I'm building something if I do it with nuts and bolts and screws. That way, in fact, this has happened many times. I built a robot or something and I have some arms on it, and then I come up with a better idea that, oh, these arms would look so much better on. So then I just unscrew the arms, and I put some new ones on, and those other arms go into something else. And so it's a lot easier to continue to use pieces or change pieces if I need to. So I started doing this. I was doing illustration art since right before I was ready to retire. I was writing some children's books and I was doing illustrating for them. And it wasn't until 2009 that I actually got into doing the 3D stuff. And if you can believe it or not, I started big and I worked my way down. I started building science fiction furniture. Yeah. And how that came about, I was in a thrift store one time and I was walking around looking at stuff, because I was collecting art and antiques and stuff in thrift stores. This was back before many people were using the internet, and so you could find good art and antiques and stuff, and they didn't know what they had because they couldn't look it up. So I was walking through and I saw this, it's one of those typical vinyl chairs with the steel legs on it. I think they were done in the 70s or so. And then right next to it there was a, they take plywood and they can bend it into shapes and then make chair seats and stuff. Well, there was a magazine rack that was bent layers of plywood, and it was sitting right next to the chair. And I'm looking at those, and for some reason I thought, that would be cool if you took that magazine rack and you used that for your seat, and then you would have a place you could put your magazines underneath where you're sitting. I don't know why I thought of it. So I bought the 2 pieces, and then I took it home and I ripped off the vinyl, and I took off the old padding and stuff, and there was beautiful wood underneath it. And in fact, it was wood that matched the magazine rack. So then I resanded down the wood, I varnished it and made it real nice, and I mounted the magazine rack on it. And then I had that curved piece that was in the back of the chair, and then the open piece, of course, in the front, you put your magazines. And I had a little drawer pull there, so if you put your magazines in, they wouldn't slide out, they would sit behind that drawer pull. And then, because of the curved surface, I don't know why I thought of it, but I thought, oh, I could do like Salvador Dali paint a clock on there, and it was really sort of melting and dripping along that curve. So then I did that, and then I created a story that went with it that involved Salvador Dali in the late 20s, and that piece of wood that had the clock on it, and I incorporated to the story an incident I came across, an article online about somebody the same time period, late 20s, who supposedly perfected teleportation. And so I thought, oh, this would be cool, throw that in the story. So the story, and I'll just give you a brief summary of what it was. This guy he finally perfected teleportation, and he was so excited. He happened to have a laboratory right next to Dali's studio, and so he was so excited he had to tell somebody and show him. So he runs next door, and Dali's in there, and he was doing some painting, and he convinced Dali to come over and look what was happening. And he said, and bring something with you so that you know this is not a trick. So he was going to show him how he could transport it from one tube to the other tube. Sort of like the movie The Fly. Yeah. You walk in this tube. So then Dali, the only thing he could think of is he had a board on the floor that he had painted this clock on it, and there was a fly that flew onto it when the paint was wet and stuck onto it, and so it was no good anymore, so he just tossed it on the floor. So on the way out, he grabbed that and took it with him, and so then they put that, they put it in the one tube, and the guy cranks up the machine, he pulls the lever, and all of a sudden it started to smoke a little bit, and then it stopped. Nothing happened. So then the guy he runs up to the machine, he opens it up, he goes in, and he's looking at the controls in there, and all of a sudden the machine starts smoking, and he loses sight of this guy because the chamber is filled with smoke, and all of a sudden it starts smoking in the other chamber, and when the smoke clears, Dali's standing there and looking, and here's this pile of glutinous mass on the floor, and the board had the clock on it, but it was all distorted and melting, and it had such an impact on him that he never forgot that, and right after that is when he started his surrealism. And if you've ever looked at some of his painting stuff, he always has little flies and insects on things. So I made the story so that if you looked up this date and this person, you looked up this date and this person, you looked up when Dolly starts surrealism and stuff, you go, well, that's true, it's got to be a true story. So that's what started that. I had a Twilight Zone chair where there was a connection between Rod Serling and an unknown author who used a chair that Serling would get this chair that created optical illusions that would give Serling all his ideas. And then when the chair disappeared, and eventually it was purchased by an unknown English teacher who all of a sudden, within that year, had 2 bestsellers, and he became known as Stephen King. And so if you looked up this guy's name before he was Stephen King, you looked up the dates, you looked up when Rod Serling passed away, and after he passed away, the chair ended up in a thrift store or something, and this English teacher bought it. And it was, again, wow, that's true. Got to read it. So eventually it had 14 pieces in the show, and they all had a story with them. And that's how it started. But you only have so much room to store furniture. So I worked my way down to small stuff like this. So, bizarre set of events that got me started. The space shuttle disaster, walking in a thrift store and seeing 2 pieces next to each other. If they would have been different parts of the store, it never would have happened. Just a lot of things happen by chance. And all these pieces just by chance too. I'll find things that are sitting right next to each other, and then all of a sudden they tell me what they're going to be. And then, because a lot of people ask me, well, do you have an idea you start with and you start finding pieces, or how do you do it? And I said, well, a lot of times I'll see a piece that tells me what it's going to be. So I guess wood carvers are like that too. They have a piece of wood and they know what it's going to look like. It's just a matter of taking away the pieces that aren't going to be part of the sculpture, and when they're done, they have this sculpture. So that's what happens in a lot of cases. When I do commission work, then, in fact, I'll pass this around while I'm talking. When I do commission work, then those are sometimes harder pieces because I have to start from scratch. I don't start with a piece, know what I'm going to do, and then look for the pieces that are to scale, that would look proportional to what I'm doing. But a lot of times, most often, whatever I find gives me the idea of what it's going to be. Before I pass this around, I didn't start doing robots till 2015. I had just built a robot for my favorite movie, Forbidden Planet. I built a 3-foot-tall Robbie the Robot, and I took him I was living in Colorado Springs, and every year I would go to the Pikes Peak Art Festival. It was a big festival. I would set up my booth and stuff, and there was lots of vendors, lots of people would show up. But I brought them to my booth not to sell them, but just to draw people into the booth. Well, what I found out was that about 90% of the people walked in the booth and saw it. Their first reaction was, "Oh, danger, danger, Will Robinson." And I said, no, actually, Robbie came about 10 years before Lost in Space. So then I had to build Lost in Space so people could see the difference between, so they could see them side by side. Well, this was the second robot I did. And he actually lights up. But the best... So he talks a little bit in his So a lot of pieces, especially robots, I can incorporate some electronics and stuff into it. So then I had those 2 pieces, and somebody that was at the art festival saw my robot, and I got This was in July of 2015. And I got a call the next month from the Bridge Gallery in Colorado Springs, and they said, we have a full gallery open. Would you like to do could you do a full gallery show of nothing but TV, movie, robots, pop culture, science fiction? And I never say no. I said, sure, I can do that. And then I asked when it was. And they said, well, it's in October. But, okay. I already said yes. So by October, I had a 25-piece show. Wow. I did this one. I did Johnny Five from Short Circuit. I had Wall-E. I had Star Wars figures. I had Doctor Who, Daleks, all kinds of stuff. One of the most exciting, fun shows I ever did. And then I started building robots. In fact, in my studio gallery in my house, when you walk in, I have 3 rooms that are all gallery. The main room when you walk in is the pop culture science fiction room. And you'll see things from related to TV and movie science fiction. I have Mad Max pieces, and I have mannequins dressed up in Mad Max costume, astronauts, Doc Brown, Back to the Future 2. In fact, I took that outfit and I wore it at Mile High Con, which is a big sci-fi convention in Denver last October, and it won the whole cosplay. Of course, it didn't hurt that I had a portable flux capacitor that was working that I could take with me. So if I didn't win, I could go back in time and change the outfit until I got it right. And then this piece, again, pop culture, science fiction. The Mile High Con now has a model building exhibit. These guys are professional model builders. They get these model kits and they put them together, and then they paint them to look like they were in, like Star Wars figures that were going to battle and stuff, and they alter them a little bit, and they're really cool, and some of these guys are really good at it. And I thought, well, mine's kind of like a model. I took up Johnny Five and I took up the Time Machine, and when I brought them in, all the guys came over to look at them over, and they asked me about them. I said, well, it's not really a model. I just use repurposed materials. But ended up winning the whole model. Won the grand prize. So I guess they were impressed enough that I could do it without starting with anything, and that was exciting. But it's the 4th time machine that I built. I did a couple other ones. I did one that I actually finished, and I didn't know until several days later, but I finished it the day Rod Taylor passed away. Oh. So I finished it. The next day I bought a glass trophy case that they use for footballs. I went to Hobby Lobby, bought a glass trophy case, put felt in it, and made it look a little bit like a Victorian rug on the bottom and stuff. And then the next day I picked up the Gazette, found out Rod Taylor passed away. So that became my tribute to Rod Taylor piece, and couldn't sell that, so then I made a couple more. And this is the most recent one that I did. I sold a couple already. As far as where I get resources, garage sales, thrift stores are great places. Restores, like Restore in Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver. I picked up these old vintage drawer pulls. These are early 1900s, which goes perfect with the theme of this. But there's all kinds of cool old brass, copper building materials and stuff that I can pick up at restores. Estate sales, antique stores are great places to look for things. I try to, in many cases, start with something that's so unusual or unique or hard to get that I can't even duplicate it. And then I start with that, and then I build off of it. And nor would I want to duplicate anything anyway. Even the 4 different time machines I did, they all are noticeably different from each other, but they all have the same theme to them. And so anybody that when they buy something, they get something that's unique. Nobody, especially when they do like lamps. I love doing lamps. And people will have something that nobody else will have. So they become great conversation pieces. So those are the places. Flea markets are good places to look for stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes I have pieces, things I find I don't even know what they are. I always do a description. I call it my ingredient list, so you can look at it and see what goes into that piece. Because a lot of times that's a challenge. You look at it and you go, what is that? But as soon as you know what it is, like, oh, of course. Once you take something out of context, sometimes it's a lot more challenging to figure out what it is, or what it used to be before I got it. So I do an ingredient list like this. But now with, on my phone I have an app called Google Lens, and so now I just take a picture of it, and in almost every case it tells me what it is. If it's an old plumbing or electrical part and I have no idea what it is, it'll tell me what it is, and sometimes it'll tell me what they sell for, and I thought, in a couple of cases I decided, oh, well, I can't repurpose that. I can't sell my piece for that much. And this is almost one of those pieces. This, nobody has seen this yet except for you guys. Has anybody heard of the Enigma machine?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I've always been fascinated by the story behind that from World War II. So I did a little research because I had an idea I wanted to build one using an old typewriter. Well, when I did the research, I found out that the Soviets had something very similar, and I didn't bring in the name of what it's called, but they had something very similar, but they used numbers instead of, the Enigma machines look like a typewriter, but they used numbers to code the different letters and messages. So I happened to come across this Burroughs adding machine, and super heavy. I mean, it's a cast iron. And I thought, oh, I could do a Soviet one. And then I have all these set of numbers. I'm in the process of making a code book. And I have a little leather-bound code book that goes with it that shows you how you use the numbers to code the different letters. So when I started doing the research, and I looked up the Burroughs adding machine, and I found out that there's some of them selling for over $200. But, oh boy. I don't want to find out that it's the shape that mine's in, which is almost mint, that it's worth much more than what I'm going to sell this for. So I had to do this without altering the machine in any way. So it's all set up so that it can be taken apart and it can be sold separate if I need to. So for this one, I have a little toggle switch in the back, and so I have a light that turns on, and then I have a wireless remote that does all the calculating and sends the message. And it just so happens that there are 8 different programmable sequences of flashes on here, and there happens to be 8 different rows of numbers here, so that's going to work perfect. The coding flashing that comes in, and of course all the monitors of the machine know what that flash is. They know which line they're working with. And then they know to send a message from that particular line using just those numbers. And so it'll be fun doing some creative writing just to be able to put together this code book to go along with this. And then you can change it to, let's see. Some of them just are unsteady, some of them phase in and out, some of them flash different sequences. Yeah, there's no flashes in and out. This panel that I picked up with all these holes in was at a restore. I have no idea what it is, whatever it was ever used for, but I have this whole string of battery remote wireless LEDs that you can program from Harbor Freight, that they were small enough they would actually show up through those holes. I thought, oh, that's perfect for that. And so then they had to make it look like it was from that time period. So I used like an Edison bulb in there and all kinds of stuff. So, so sometimes the pieces, when I find out what they are, I find out they might be worth more than what I'm going to use them, repurpose them for. So I come up with different ideas, or I don't repurpose those. Some of you in here have been in my gallery before, and you've seen some of the stuff that I do. It's one of those places where you could walk in and I do like tours where people come and they call or text me ahead of time, and I give them the tour and I show them everything. You could go in there half a dozen times at least and see all kinds of different things than you saw the first time. It's sort of my holding place for things that will go to different conventions and things. And then some of it, like the TV and movie robot and the pop culture stuff, those I don't sell because I've put in for an exhibit at the Arvada Center for the Arts and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver to do an exhibit, and that'll be my foot in the door if I have a 20-some piece show ready to go. So they are just part of the attraction when people come to look at the gallery. And then I have an outdoor gallery, sculpture garden, there's about 20 pieces that people come by anytime and look at that. I didn't start doing outdoor stuff until I moved to La Vida, and I was getting rid of junk that I picked up in a property I bought, and so.
Tell them we're in the Jerry so they can jog off.
Yeah, I'm like a block from here. If you go up the road to Field Street, East Field Street, you take a left as you're going south on Main, and third house on the right, you can't miss it. There's robots and giant birds and animals, and there's even a giant tree that's that looks like he's alive. His name is Woody. He's on Neighborhood Watch all the time. So yeah, that's a place you can come anytime you want, and feel free to walk up and look closely at anything. And there's stuff on all sides of the house, even in the back part of my property in the corner of the alley. I have a giant white stork from Transylvania with 2 babies in a nest and all kinds of stuff.
How about the gallery itself? Do we call you?
Yeah, if you just call or text ahead of time. And I have some cards I could put my number on the back. So,
Okay.
just let me know, because it takes me about 10-15 minutes to set up all the electronics and everything to give you the full tour. And then I have it all lit up and stuff, and it's a lot more enjoyable. You'll see what this stuff looks like when it's turned on and ready to go. I wanted to make sure I had a little bit of let me talk about one or two more things here. This is a piece I just recently done. I've been working on a series that I call the Japanese tin type robots that they did in the 50s and 60s. They were real box-like and real retro looking. So somebody gave me some tea canisters, so this is one I just finished recently. It's from a ginger tea canister, so this is Ginger Snap. And all the tin type robots were wind up, some of them would walk and stuff. So these all have a little wind up thing on the back, but they don't walk. They're pretty stationary. And then here's a piece I still don't know what this is, this metal piece I got at Restore, but I found out that it opened up. So it's a Tesla cyber tank. And it's got a remote control. It's driverless because it's got a remote control robot in there that does the steering and everything. close up all the way in. But I left it open so you can see there's actually more to it. And that's true of a lot of things. There's a lot of things I build that have hidden features to them that unless you knew it, you wouldn't know that, oh, this comes off and this lights up, or these pieces move and things like that. That's half the fun of it. But for me, the enjoyment of doing this stuff is to look at things that other people wouldn't look twice at, or things that people want to get rid of, and give them a new life and be able to repurpose. Because there's so many things nowadays that don't get fixed anymore. They're not meant to be repaired. They just get thrown away and they don't work. And even things that work, it's like, okay, well, the newest one is on the market now, so I have to have that. So what do you do with the old one? Well, you throw it out, or it ends up at a thrift store or something like that, or a garage sale. And so I always felt that kind of idea it's not sustainable. I try to, especially when I have exhibits at sci-fi conventions, I have a lot of kids that show up. Kids love the robots and stuff. And I try to inspire them to think twice about throwing something out if they can actually make something and repurpose it and do something cool with it. So one of my biggest pleasures is to be able to inspire people to think twice about what they can do with things. And just, especially when I'm in convention and I have all kinds of stuff on the table, just to sit back and watch as people are walking by and looking, all of a sudden you see a big grin on their face and you realize, okay, now that probably has a piece in it that they remember growing up that their mother or their grandmother had. Because sometimes I've used old antique kitchen things like old colanders I turn into lampshades and stuff, and those are so much fun. And so the enjoyment is just to see people's reaction to it, and the fact that they stop because a lot of times you're in a gallery and you see people, they'll just walk through and they don't really spend much time on something, but I notice on a lot of things they do, people will stop twice and they'll take a look at it. And so if I can get their attention for more than a couple of seconds of that, okay, there's some kind of an emotional response there, or they see something, they recognize it. So to me, that's half the fun of it, is just being able to do that. Questions that anybody might have?
Do you price things according to how much time you spend doing it, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. A couple of things that go into the price. The cost of the items. And if I have to use something that's kind of rare and it costs me a bunch at an antique store, then that'll reflect the price.
Okay.
How long it takes me. And I've been able to, over the years, make things much quicker than I did before. So that helps me bring the price down, so because I don't have to spend a lot of time on it. And then whether I have to paint it or not, and because painting sometimes takes me a while. I have to do layers and wait for it to dry, and then or disassemble something, paint the piece individually, reassemble. So yeah, a lot of times it comes down to how long it took to do that and everything. Good question. Yes?
Has the Tesla Cybertruck dropped in price recently?
Ever since that one blew up in front of the hotel, yeah, I've had to bring the price down on that one. I heard people are covering up the Tesla emblems on their, some people are covering up the emblems on their cars and stuff. They're not as popular as they were before. Yeah, good question.
Do you sell online?
I have not yet done online. I had a website a while back and it got hacked, and so I had to shut it down. And so now with GoDaddy, I'm in the process of rebuilding another one. And so I haven't started putting things on it yet, but I'll have a way set up with PayPal that people can actually buy stuff in. But it's not ready yet. Yes?
What's the most challenging piece that you made?
Oh,
You found most challenging?
good question. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because I'll send this around too. This has a lot of the TV and movie robots in it. The very first one is a commission piece I did for in Mexico, there's a publishing house called Dreaming Robot Press. Dreaming Robot Press. And their business card has a little robot sitting against a wall, and he's got a book in his hand, and he's dozed off. So they asked me, they were at the convention, they saw my robots, and they said, could you do one to match our logo? So the very first thing you see is the one I did for them, and I turned it into a bookend so they could actually show up at a convention, have their books there, and then this is one of the bookends. But then the rest of these are TV and movie robots. And the most challenging piece I've done is the second robot you see here. Robbie the robot from Forbidden Planet. He's 3 feet tall. I talked a little bit about him. He's got a Bluetooth speaker in his head. He can interact with people with my phone. He lights up. He even has a sound-sensitive plasma disc by his mouth, so when he talks, it sparks. So it's great special effects. And then his voice is actually dialogue from the Forbidden Planet movie. It took 4 weeks working on it every day to do this piece, and finding the parts took over a year to get the pieces. But what I started with, and this is a perfect example of having a piece and deciding what you're going to build based on what it looks like. The dome on this, it's something that Crayola made. It's called a Crayola color dome. And it was a round dome, plexiglass dome, and it had a base on it. And you would flip a switch, and there was a plexiglass parabola inside the dome that would revolve. And then you had a set of different kinds of crayons. The kids would draw a color on those parabola discs, and then they would flip the switch and it would rotate. But then there was another switch you'd flip, and it would project these little sort of black lights, ultraviolet lights, onto the discs. And at night, those colors would glow in the dark.
Whoa.
So it was like a glow dome. But I saw it in the toy section of the thrift store, and I go, oh my God, that's the head of Robbie the robot. So then it came down to fabricating all the other parts to be in proportion with that. So after about a year to collect the parts, and the hardest part was the legs, the bulbs I used for the legs. And I'll see if somebody in here can figure out what those are, if you can guess. But that was the most labor-intensive piece that I did. But to this day, it's the best robot I've ever done. And I was offered $4,000 for it, but I didn't want to sell that one. And if you know it, and probably the reason I was offered that much is, I don't know if you heard, but about 6 or 7 years ago, at a Christie's auction, the highest auction piece for a movie memorabilia piece that was ever sold was Robbie the Robot, and it sold for $5.3 million. The original Robbie the Robot.
Was the guy inside?
No. Operator not included. So I'll pass this around, you can take a look at it. But it's got my Johnny Five in there, and I did Wall-E, and I did all kinds of Star Wars pieces. So back to, did I answer the question? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question though as a follow-up. You said you had the robot reciting from the...
Oh yeah, from the
So do you have to get permission to use that text, or what happens with that?
No one said anything yet. No, it's actually out there on, there's a site that does voice streamings from movies and stuff, so you actually get it online. It's a streaming site.
It's in the public domain then, is it, or what?
Is it what?
In the public domain?
Yeah, it's in the public domain.
Well, amazing.
And there's another site I found out that you can access it, and then if you type in a message that you want to have read, it will do whatever voice you want. So I'm working on a piece right now. I got the message I wanted to say, but it'll be in the voice of Stephen Hawking. And so that's going to be a wonderful piece to use, but that's something that's out there, it's part of the public domain, and so I don't have to get any permission. And even when I build a robot like Lost in Space or something, because I'm not mass producing anything, it's a one-off piece, it's something that I would never have problems with. With whoever has the copyright on the robot itself. And in fact, now you can buy for $25,000, well that was 10 years ago, probably more, but for $25,000 or more, you can buy the whole robot kit from Lost in Space and do a full scale one.
Wow.
And I've seen those at Robocon in Denver already where they have. And then there's like 100 different programming messages that you can say. So these guys that were operating it, people would walk in, especially little kids, and they'd walk up to it, and they would say something, and based on what they said or asked the robot, they would punch in the response, and it would respond back to them. It was like, and kids just amazed. It was so memorable for those kids, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
So Gary, you have a big workshop where you store all this stuff?
I have two outbuildings in my, I lucked out when I found my house. I didn't have to build anything inside. I have two outbuildings in the back which turned into workshops and storage areas. And then I purchased a property in back tax auction 4 blocks from my house. It's a mobile home, and it was trashed inside. I cleaned it all out, repainted everything, and it's a great storage places for, especially for containers when they use them to transport stuff to a convention. But for big pieces, if I know I'm going to use and build something in the future, it's a great place for storage. But yeah, I don't have to fill up my house, which is a good thing. Yes?
I'm not sure I can do this very clearly, but to what in your early development do you attribute this fascination with found art and just the excitement of putting things together?
That's a great question. I started at a young age watching a lot of sci-fi movies and stuff, sci-fi and horror movies. In fact, the best ones were like a Friday or Saturday night on TV, but we weren't allowed to stay up that late. So after everybody went to bed, I would sneak downstairs and I would turn the sound all the way down, or barely audible, and I would watch these movies on sites like Svengoolie and all these cool science fiction sites. So I was always interested in it. And then even in high school, one of my projects, it was for a science class. I built a full-scale model on a piece of plywood. I built this full-scale lunar city. And I had inverted egg cartons, I had plastic containers that turned into rocket ships. I had a whole moon colony I built. And it was all painted in fluorescent colors and then mounted under black light. It was the 70s. So, and that was the very first piece I ever did with repurposed materials. And then even for an English class, my senior year, I built it was a ancient history class. I built a Shakespearean theater in the round, all out of balsa wood. And then my grandparents were seamstresses, and my grandfather made drapery, so he helped me make these tiny little red velvet drapes that went on the stage and everything. It was all detailed, and it was pretty cool. And got an A in the class, and the English department bought it from me. So they could use it in the future. So even back then, without any real purpose, I was repurposing things, and always had some kind of a creative streak in me where I could, well, my grandfather I'd go out to his house to do his landscaping on the weekends and cut his lawn and stuff. First thing we did every Saturday morning, we went to the county dump. And sometimes we would come back with more things than we talked about. Because we'd go walking around and he goes, I can't believe they threw away that fan. It just needs a new cord. So my grandfather was always collecting stuff, and he had a garage full of stuff that my grandmother would always complain. She would say, well, you know, why do you keep that stuff? And his response, and I still use it today, is, well, if I throw it away 2 weeks from now, I'm going to need it for something. But he grew up during the Depression, and they didn't throw anything out. They just repurposed it. He didn't waste anything. And so I grew up not wasting things. It just, if I threw it away, it was really junk. But if I hung on to it, I could usually come up with an idea to use it to make something. Other questions?
Are there other people doing similar work? I mean, not copying you, but people making sculptures that you're aware of out of recycled materials? And is this a medium that's progressing, or what's happening?
That's a good question. When I first started doing it, I didn't do it because I wanted to do some kind of art that I thought, oh, nobody else seems to be doing this. But I just made it stuff because I know I had an idea and I wanted to do it. And, in fact, the very first piece I ever did, that the exhibit I did, I had like a Nikola Tesla chair with spark lightning behind your head, and a Metropolis chair with a plasma globe on top and stuff. And there was a bunch of younger artists that came in, and they were talking about, this was in 2010, they said, wow, that's really steampunking. I don't know. Steampunk, what's that? So I had to look it up and found out, oh, steampunk's like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells kind of science fiction. And so, so then I realized what steampunk was, and so then I started making more stuff like that. But when I go to conventions and stuff, I often will have people come up to me and tell me, we've been to the big ones. We've been to Comic-Con, San Diego, and Denver, and all over. We don't see anybody doing what you're doing. So I know it's not a common thing out there, but I have seen artists online that do some things. And there's, but a lot of repurposed material art seems to be more like collages, where they put things together, they're wall mounted. They aren't necessarily functional, or they don't have a particular theme to them and stuff. Although I have seen there's some really good artists out there that do some incredible steampunk stuff. But yeah, I find that there's not many people doing it, which is good for me, because it's not, when I go to a convention, I know I'm not going to have anybody that's going to be doing stuff like me. Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, sir.
I'm glad Salvador Dali was pleased.
Yeah, yeah. He would look at that, and I can just see the expression in his face. In fact, not too long ago, with my father, we went to the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg in Florida, and he had an amazing exhibit of stuff, and he actually did some 3D stuff too that I wasn't aware of. So we got this great picture. My dad and I stand next to me, and in between us is a lifelike, like a hologram of Salvador Dali, and he's talking and stuff, and he's right between us photobombing us. Salvador Dali's got this look on his face. I'm sure that's what he would look like if he saw that chair. That looks familiar. I thought I threw that away. Great questions. Anything else? Yes?
So if we have some metal object that looks interesting, do we just put it on the report?
Oh, that's funny you should mention. When I first moved here, people found out that I was repurposing things, especially since they saw a couple sculptures in the front of the yard. I had things show up on my front porch, no note or anything. And I knew people, it was something they were going to throw away, but they didn't want to throw away if they knew somebody could do something with it. In fact, one was a folding recumbent, it's a folding recumbent bike, and it's now Running Man in my front yard. So some of the things I've used, but if I had to put a sign saying, please, no more donations, especially big stuff, I couldn't.
Satellite dish.
Yeah, I've done number satellite dish pieces. In fact, if you look at my Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors in my front yard, I've got 2 satellite dishes that form the head of this creature. But I do have people that, if they have something, they can text me or send me a picture of it. And if it's something I get an idea right away that I could do with it, I'll tell. Yeah, I can come by and pick that up. I'm sure I could repurpose that into something. And yeah, so that's the way I do it now. Every once in a while, I still find something that
Shows up.
the word hasn't gotten completely out yet.
Are the legs floats for the bathroom toilet?
Yeah. Totally take floats. You know how hard it was to come up with 8 of those? Restore.
Are those your birds over at Adrian and Mary's?
Yes.
Yes.
In the nest?
If you've been on Oak Street,
yeah.
kitty corner from Allie's Restaurant,
Yeah.
I did Mary and Adrian had seen the stork I did in my yard, and they asked me about doing a piece. So I have a nest on a dead tree stump with 2 magpies in it. Yeah, and it's got, one of them's got a little robotic fly in its mouth. And they encourage people to walk up close and take a look at it. But what a lot of people may have not noticed was if you look straight up on the dead tree, there's a knot hole a little ways up, and there's a woodpecker sticking its head out. So that's kind of a hidden piece. I'm thinking about putting an arrow pointing up. And then a little sign, "Home Sweet Home." So that would be cute, kind of cartoonish.
I walk our dog by there all the time. And yeah, I don't think that I have to pay a lot of attention to the dog. But I will watch it.
Yeah, and I was able to get some, it's called color shifting paint that shifts, it's very reflective. So it was perfect for the wings of the magpie because they got the reflective glue on there. So I think unless you're driving by, if you're going by slowly, you can tell that they're not real. But if you're driving by and you just glance at them, they kind of look like they're real.
Yeah.
And then the nest itself are trimmings from my lilac bushes that, for some reason, I didn't throw them away. They were meant to be a nest. Yes?
Do you ever consider yourself a hoarder?
I used to be a hoarder. I would collect things I liked, but I found, and I never sold anything, I just collected, but I found out that if I could turn it into art, it was easy to let go of it. Because, like I said, half the fun was taking this stuff and then making something cool out of it. And the fact that somebody bought it and they appreciate it and it's in their house is like, hey, it's found a new home and I don't have to hang on to it anymore and somebody else can enjoy it. And so now I have a lot less things than I used to have because I turned them into pieces and sold them. Since I started in 2010, I think my count is over 900 pieces I've done.
Wow.
So And I had probably, well, in my gallery, I've got close to 100 pieces in the gallery, but probably 125 pieces I haven't sold, but a lot of it sell, and I keep making more.
Still do commissions?
I still do. Yeah. And I have lots of branch materials, so if anybody, if you have a stump in your yard, especially if you don't know what to do with it, they make perfect pedestals for sculptures and stuff. And I often thought too, an idea that we have such cool artists in town here, that especially the painters, that I thought it might be a great idea if we could get together, and we'd have to clear it with Levita propane, but everybody's got a propane tank. If we could have artists go around and people volunteer to have their tanks painted, we could do all kinds of cool tanks and then have a propane tank tour and like a gallery tour. Yeah, and Russ has an idea. He's going to turn his into the Fat Boy atomic bomb. And we've got plans.
I want flowers. Flowers and birds.
And then Emily at the Mercantile had asked me about turning hers into a giant sub sandwich. I think it would be pretty cool. And then the house across the alley from me, they're still working on it after about 3 years, and there's an old propane tank in the back. And unlike what I did, my propane tank, Levita propane came by one time, and they were checking the volume on the tank, and I asked the guy, I said, would you mind if I put a fresh coat of paint on my tank? And I don't think anybody ever asked him to repaint their tank before. He said, yeah, that'd probably be okay as long as you use a light color and a gloss. So he had no idea what I had in mind. So that was in the fall. He came back in the spring, and I happened to be walking out in the backyard, and he pulls up, and he gets out, and all of a sudden he's got this big grin in his face, and they're good. He's a Beatles fan. Because I had not only painted like the Yellow Submarine, but I had the rudder on the back, I had the propeller on the back, I had 4 periscopes for the 4 Beatles on it, and they were all held down with powerful magnets, so they could be removed if they needed to be. And so they were removable, and I thought, well, that would be a good start. That I already have one that people have come to look at it. And so if that ever, I talked to Kenny at the Creative District, and he's going to bring it up at one of the meetings and stuff. So in the meantime, if that ever materializes, if you have ideas for your propane tank, we would do painting and stuff, and then the artist might ask for a small donation or something like that. But I think that would be such a cool idea to have a walking tour in town, maybe during the art festival weekend or Oktoberfest or something like that. Because we used to have studio tours, which I think they might be trying to bring back again. So that would be kind of fun. The little town known for its propane tank. No, a pig one would be.
Yeah, it was,
Oh,
that was really good.
Well, the one across the alley from me is really shabby looking, and the paint's coming off. I thought, whoever was in there, I have an idea that I would like to do a tank where the front I would paint what looks like a giant hole, and then I would have metal pieces with magnets on the back with curved bent pieces of metal on the outline of the hole, and then in the black hole I would have painted whatever is in the background behind, so it looked like the tank blew a hole in the top. I think that would be, Dolly would love that. Optical illusion. Especially like the tank, there's a shed behind it, so I could paint what looks like the boards on the shed and stuff like you're looking through, and that would be a fun piece to do. That'd be these metal pieces sticking out all bent and warped and charred that you could remove if you wanted to. So if you have any ideas for your tank, come up with them, because maybe we'll get something going. Great question. Any other questions? Well, great. And I have some cards. I can put my number on the back if you ever want to come and even if you've seen my studio tour before, I have a whole bunch of different things. I'm always making new things and selling some of the other stuff, replacing it. So there's always a lot of different new things in there that you would see than the last time you've been there. So I can give those out and just call or text me if I'm around. I'll take the time to set the tour and give you the whole scoop. And,
Thank you.
Good afternoon.